November 22, 1963, at 12:30 p.m., President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, Texas. The motorcade route passed directly in front of the Texas School Book Depository. Lee Harvey Oswald worked on the 6th floor of that building. He fired 3 shots from a window overlooking Dealey Plaza. The president was killed. But there was a problem. Several problems. First, the CIA knew about Oswald. They'd been monitoring him since 1959 when he defected to the Soviet Union. They had a thick file on him. Surveillance photos, reports, intercepted communications. They knew he was a potential threat. Second, the FBI knew about Oswald. In October 1963, just weeks before the assassination, FBI agent James Hosty interviewed Oswald's wife Marina. Hosty knew Oswald had returned from the Soviet Union. He knew Oswald was living in Dallas. He knew Oswald was unstable. Third, the motorcade route was finalized on November 18th. 4 days before the assassination, the route passed directly in front of Oswald's workplace, the Texas School Book Depository. Anyone checking for security threats along that route would have flagged that building. Fourth, the Secret Service, the agency responsible for protecting the president, was never told about Oswald. They weren't told he lived in Dallas. They weren't told he worked along the motorcade route. They weren't told he was a potential assassin. And fifth, perhaps most disturbing, newly released CIA documents from March 2025 confirm that the CIA and FBI deliberately withheld information about Oswald from the Secret Service before the assassination. If you want to understand how the most powerful intelligence agencies in America allowed JFK to be killed, hit that like button. This is the story of a failure so catastrophic, so complete, that it can only be explained 2 ways: criminal negligence or deliberate conspiracy. Lee Harvey Oswald was not an unknown. He was not some random nobody. He was on the radar of every major intelligence agency in the United States. Oswald was born in New Orleans in 1939. At age 17, he joined the U.S. Marines. He was stationed at a top-secret U-2 spy plane base in Atsugi, Japan. He had access to classified information. Then, in 1959, at age 20, Oswald defected to the Soviet Union. He walked into the U.S. Embassy in Moscow and announced he was renouncing his American citizenship. He handed over military secrets. He told Soviet officials he would give them everything he knew about U-2 operations. The CIA immediately opened a file on Oswald. So did the FBI. Oswald wasn't just a defector. He was a traitor, someone who betrayed his country and handed secrets to America's Cold War enemy. But in 1962, Oswald changed his mind. He wanted to return to the United States, and shockingly, the U.S. government let him. Oswald and his Russian wife Marina arrived back in America in June 1962. The FBI interviewed him. They asked about his time in the Soviet Union. They monitored him for months. And then they let him disappear into civilian life. Oswald moved to Dallas in October 1962. He got a job. He rented apartments. He lived quietly. But the FBI never stopped watching. In March 1963, Oswald ordered a rifle by mail, a Mannlicher Carcano, the same rifle later used to kill JFK. In April 1963, Oswald allegedly tried to assassinate retired Army General Edwin Walker, a right-wing political figure. The bullet missed. Oswald wasn't caught, but the FBI knew about his radical politics, his obsession with Cuba, his violent tendencies. By November 1963, Lee Harvey Oswald was a walking red flag. In September 1963, just 2 months before JFK's assassination, Lee Harvey Oswald traveled to Mexico City. He visited the Cuban embassy and the Soviet embassy. He wanted a visa to travel to Cuba. He was desperate. He argued with Cuban officials. He shouted. He made threats. And according to witnesses, Oswald said he wanted to kill President Kennedy. The CIA station in Mexico City was one of the most sophisticated surveillance operations in the world. Every phone call to and from the Soviet and Cuban embassies was recorded. Every visitor was photographed. The CIA knew Oswald was there. They had audio recordings of his voice. They had surveillance photos. They knew he'd met with a KGB officer named Valery Kostakov, a suspected assassin working for Department 13, the Soviet sabotage and assassination unit. The CIA sent cables back to Washington. They reported Oswald's visit. They flagged his contact with Kostakov. They noted his suspicious behavior. But here's what the newly released documents from March 2025 revealed. The CIA never told the Secret Service. According to the declassified files, CIA officers in Mexico City sent reports to CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia. Those reports went to the FBI. But no, not the CIA, not the FBI, alerted the Secret Service that a former defector with access to classified military secrets who had just met with a KGB assassin and threatened to kill the president was living in Dallas, Texas. Why not? That's the question. Why wouldn't you tell the agency responsible for protecting the president that a clear and present danger was walking around the city where the president would soon visit? Two possibilities: incompetence or conspiracy. Either the CIA and FBI were so bureaucratically dysfunctional that they couldn't share life or death intelligence, or they deliberately withheld the information because they wanted JFK dead. On November 18th, 1963, 4 days before President Kennedy's visit to Dallas, the final motorcade route was announced. The president would travel through downtown Dallas, passing through Dealey Plaza. The route would take him directly past the Texas School Book Depository at 411 Elm Street. Standard Secret Service protocol required a security sweep of every building along the motorcade route. Agents would check for threats. They'd identify vantage points. They'd look for potential snipers. They'd compile a list of known dangerous individuals living or working near the route. If the Secret Service had done their job, they would have discovered that Lee Harvey Oswald, a former Marine, a defector to the Soviet Union, a man flagged by the CIA and FBI as a potential threat, worked on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository, right on the motorcade route, right above where the president would pass. If they'd known, they would have changed the route, or stationed agents in that building, or arrested Oswald preemptively. They would have done something, but the Secret Service didn't know, because no one told them. The FBI had interviewed Oswald's wife Marina just weeks earlier, in October 1963. Agent James Hosty knew Oswald lived in Dallas. He knew Oswald was a security risk, but Hosty never communicated this to the Secret Service. The CIA had Oswald's entire file. Defection, Mexico City, KGB contact, threats against Kennedy. But the CIA never forwarded that intelligence to the Secret Service. So on November 22, 1963, when President Kennedy's motorcade drove slowly past the Texas School Book Depository, the Secret Service had no idea that a trained rifleman with a grudge, a history of violence, and access to a perfect sniper's nest was waiting on the 6th floor. And at 12:30 p.m., Oswald fired 3 shots. The 3rd shot hit Kennedy in the head. The president died at Parkland Hospital at 1 p.m. After the assassination, the cover-up began immediately. The CIA claimed they hadn't known Oswald was a threat. The FBI claimed they'd been monitoring him, but saw no imminent danger. The Secret Service claimed they'd never been informed. But the newly released documents from March 2025 tell a different story. CIA internal memos show that officers in Mexico City flagged Oswald as a person of interest after his visit to the Soviet embassy. FBI reports show that Agent James Hosty had an active file on Oswald and had visited his home multiple times. Secret Service logs show 0 communication from either agency about Oswald before November 22nd. In other words, the CIA and FBI knew, they just didn't share. After Kennedy's death, the Warren Commission was established to investigate the assassination. The commission interviewed CIA officers, FBI agents, Secret Service personnel, and everyone pointed fingers. The CIA blamed the FBI for not sharing information. The FBI blamed the CIA for not flagging Oswald as dangerous. The Secret Service blamed both agencies for keeping them in the dark. The Warren Commission concluded that Oswald acted alone, that there was no conspiracy, that the assassination was the result of tragic miscommunication and bureaucratic failure. But miscommunication doesn't explain why multiple agencies with overlapping files on the same dangerous individual all failed to warn the Secret Service. Bureaucratic failure doesn't explain why Lee Harvey Oswald, a known defector who met with a KGB assassin and threatened the president, was allowed to work directly on the route where JFK would pass. And it doesn't explain why, after the assassination, Key evidence disappeared. Oswald's CIA file was sanitized. Pages were removed. Audio recordings from Mexico City were erased. FBI reports were rewritten. The cover-up wasn't just about protecting reputations. It was about hiding the truth. Lee Harvey Oswald wasn't the only dangerous individual the CIA and FBI failed to stop. In 1963, multiple threats against JFK were ignored. A man in Chicago named Thomas Arthur Valley, a former Marine with mental health issues, was arrested just days before JFK's planned visit to Chicago. Valley had a rifle and a detailed plan to assassinate Kennedy. The Chicago visit was quietly canceled. No publicity, no investigation. A man named Richard Case Nagel walked into a bank in El Paso and fired shots into the ceiling to get arrested. Why? He later claimed he knew about a plot to kill JFK and wanted to be in jail when it happened so he wouldn't be blamed. The FBI interviewed him and dismissed him as crazy. And then there was Oswald, defector, Soviet contact, KGB meeting, rifle purchase, threats, and nothing was done. The pattern is clear. Multiple warnings, multiple threats, multiple opportunities to stop the assassination. And every single time, the intelligence agencies either ignored the threat or failed to act. Was it incompetence? Or was it something worse? In the decades since JFK's death, researchers have asked, did the CIA want Kennedy dead? Kennedy had threatened to splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces after the Bay of Pigs disaster. He'd refused to invade Cuba during the missile crisis. He was planning to withdraw from Vietnam. He'd made enemies, powerful enemies. Men with the resources, the training, and the motive to kill a president. Did they use Oswald as a patsy? Or did they simply allow him to act, knowing he'd do their job for them? We may never know. But we know this. The CIA knew where Oswald worked. The FBI knew where Oswald lived. And the Secret Service, the one agency that could have saved JFK, was never told. Negligence or conspiracy? You decide. But remember, November 22nd, 1963, 12:30 p.m., Dealey Plaza. The president's motorcade drove past Lee Harvey Oswald's window, and no one stopped him.